So this is the Aussie burger, a lovely meat patty and some bacon.
None of what you see here comes from an animal. Not even the egg, or this prawn. In fact, everything in this vegan fish and chip shop in Sydney's Newtown comes from a plant.
So I'm going to use the pickles and mustard on it too. We've got fish that has protein and omega-3. We've got calamari, duck, bacon, fried eggs, garlic prawns, meat patties.
Can I please get an Aussie burger?
Sure. Can you have gluten?
Yes.
Restaurants like this cater to the 11% of Australians who are vegetarian or vegan.
One Aussie. So I've got some duck here for you.
Looks like duck.
Yep, I didn't have to go to the abattoir to get it. And the beauty of this thing is that you don't have to worry about cutting against the grain. It's always tender.
Owner Liz Harry took a punt 3 years ago, surprising even the vegetarians who eat here.
She handed it back to me over the counter. She said, I'm sorry, you've given me the wrong burger, you've given me real duck. And I said, I promise you I haven't. And she said, look at it, looks like duck, tastes like duck.
But what are these culinary counterfeits actually made of?
I make all the things that butchers make, but I make them with no meat.
Susie Spoon is a vegan butcher. So Susie, what are you making here?
Here we're making a schnitzel.
Right.
So it's a meat replication of a schnitzel, and it's made from the protein of wheat, which is this is gluten flour.
And so how does that gluten replicate the structure of meat?
I guess it's a high protein flour, and so when you knead it in a certain way, it gets these really beautiful fibres that really do replicate meat.
As for the taste,
The things we use just natural flavours that come from plants like paprika, white pepper, horseradish, garlic, onions, like just obvious things. But because some of those things are used in meat, like rosemary and garlic, when I use those things in my products, when you taste it, your brain thinks it's meat.
Australia is the third fastest growing vegan market in the world, according to market researcher Euromonitor International. In the United States, recent studies have shown 60% of Americans are reducing their meat intake, even if they aren't strictly vegan or vegetarian.
People don't just give up meat because they hate the taste and texture. They might give up meat because they love animals or they care about the environment or about their health.
Life Health Foods on the New South Wales Central Coast is catering to that demand on a massive scale with its big range of plant-based meat alternatives.
There is a large market there, so we think around 40% of the Australian community is actively reducing their meat.
They are called flexitarians, and no guessing who they are.
We've noticed that there has been, particularly with millennials, they are around about 60% more likely to reduce their meat than a Gen Xer.
Life Health Foods is the largest producer of meat alternatives in Australia.
We're seeing the market move and shift as the quality of the products are continuously improving, and that's what's been happening for us the last 3 years.
This is the bleeding edge of fake meat, literally. It's made with synthetic blood that browns when cooked. This liquid contains heme, a molecule found in most living things which carries oxygen through the bloodstream. Silicon Valley's startup Impossible Foods found a way to copy it, using plants. It took the DNA of soy leg hemoglobin and injected it with yeast to mass produce it.
Yeah, we're playing around with that sort of technology as well, so I don't think it's too far away from seeing an Australian-based manufacturer with that.
The patty is now available in over 1,000 US burger joints, including major fast food chains. Impossible Foods turned down a takeover bid from Google in 2015, worth up to $300 million. While meat alternatives like these are already a reality, there is a way to go before they have the full taste and texture of the real thing. But there is a technology on the horizon that aims to go one step further, and that involves replicating meat at a cellular level.
I definitely see a huge potential for laboratory-based protein products and growing them in the laboratory to be able to feed a large number of people.
At the University of Melbourne, Associate Professor Jason White is making meat from scratch.
We would take a biopsy from a live cow, for example, and then mechanically mince that up to a very fine consistency. The next step would be to digest it in the incubator for a little while, just to release the cells out.
A filter removes the gunk.
And in theory, what we've got underneath here is those single isolated precursor cells or stem cells.
So that's what grows out.
So that's what we'll put into tissue culture dishes, and that'll grow out over a number of days till they start to form actual muscle fibres.
The cells first need to feed on the nutrients in this liquid. A week later...
They're now twitching, so it's live tissue, and they're probably expanded 3 or 4 times in that period of time.
So they're growing?
Yeah, so they're growing.
A single cell has the potential to turn into 1 trillion muscle cells. The cells merge to form strings, then rings that bulk up as they contract, like human muscles do. It's far from appetising, but with flavours and colouring...
It's close to meat. It's not that juicy.
This was the first lab-grown burger patty, unveiled in 2013.
The absence is, I feel like, the fat. You know, like it's a leanness to it.
It took 3 months to grow. Savour the taste because it cost Dutch scientist Mark Post 400,000 Australian dollars to make. That's a per patty price tag. Lab-grown poultry products are also in the pipeline. Last year, US startup Memphis Meats claimed to have made lab-cultured duck and chicken.
Our goal is to make delicious, clean meat that is better for you, the environment and the animals.
Prices are falling. Memphis Meats claims it now only costs 6,000 Australian dollars to make 1 kilogram of meat. It's yet to commercialise the product. There are now about 10 companies globally in search of the holy grail, a cheap method of mass production.
The process is actually very simple in this environment. The challenge for lab meat companies will be to scale it up to commercial levels to actually be able to provide feed for people.
This liquid is part of the problem. It's made from the blood of an unborn calf. The fetus dies in the extraction process. Fetal calf serum can be used to grow almost any cell.
We're slowly moving away and trying to define that, and that's expensive to actually put all those components into that media.
There are plant-based serums, but they aren't as good yet. It means for now making lab-grown meat, ironically, still involves killing an animal. Meat expert Professor Robin Warner has been investigating the other challenges of in vitro meat.
I don't think we'll ever get to replicating a whole steak or a whole lamb chop. Meat is a very complex structure comprised of muscle cells embedded within connective tissue, which has got capillaries and blood vessels all around it, and fat cells as well. So it's the totality of all of those cells together that make up when we put a piece of steak into our mouths, and we get this wonderful taste of the meat.
A US study showed 31% of consumers want to try synthetic meat, but only 7% would swap to it for good. Professor Warner has been studying the demand in Australia for cultured meat and says the people surveyed were wary.
The concept of eating meat coming out of a culture or test tube was just so foreign to them. I think it will become popular and relatively prevalent. I think that disgust factor will change.
Before any such product could be eaten here, it would need to pass rigorous public health and safety tests.
Growing food using animals doesn't make much sense.
This man wants to make cultured meat cool.
I think if we communicate the fact that cellular agriculture requires over 90% less land and water and emits over 96% less greenhouse gas emissions, it will be quite compelling to any audience member. I started Food Frontier after realising that meat production is at the centre of the biggest sustainability and public health crises that we are facing as a globe, And after realising that plant-based and clean meat technologies can help transform this for the good of people and planet.
Regardless of whether there actually is a meat production crisis, Thomas King launched his not-for-profit organisation late last year. Its aim is to promote cultured meat and plant-based alternatives and support scientists in Australia and the Asia-Pacific wanting to start their own fake meat companies.
We expect that we'll see Australia's first clean meat startup this year, 2018, and we're really excited to be supporting them with that venture.
Food Frontier is financed by philanthropists who see so-called clean meat as the future of food.
Clean meat, in part, is a nod to clean energy because clean meat, compared with conventional meat, has a fraction of the impact on the climate and planet. But it's also literally cleaner. The meat we eat today has bacterial contamination on it most of the time, whereas clean meat, there's no slaughter involved in that, and so it's free from that contamination.
No, because the risk of contamination can come from people. If you get a disease go through your cultured meat, it wipes the whole population out.
The UN Food and Agriculture Organisation estimates beef farming accounts for 41% of the global livestock sector's overall greenhouse gas emissions. That's tipped to get worse, given the world's consumption of meat, milk and eggs is projected to increase 70% by 2050. But while growing meat in a lab could reduce emissions, it might also create problems of its own.
It's going to be an energy-intensive process just from the equipment that's going to be required and production of those nutrient mixes.
More than traditional livestock farming?
Look, yeah, I think at the moment, yes, absolutely.
Regardless, some meat processors now want a stake in the game, backing the technology that could threaten them. In January, one of the world's biggest meat processors, Tyson Foods, and agricultural conglomerate Cargill Inc. invested in lab meat startup Memphis Meats. Billionaire venture capitalist Richard Branson and Bill Gates also chipped in. In the world's largest beef-producing country, this recent wave of investments has worried the livestock sector.
Our members came to us last year with this concern that we don't want to go down the same route as the dairy industry, that we want to be able to clearly define what beef and meat means in a regulatory setting.
The United States Cattlemen's Association is now petitioning the country's Department of Agriculture to define meat as coming from the flesh of an animal, slaughtered in the traditional way.
We don't agree with the term clean meat. That implies that traditional ranching is dirty. So we would rather it be called something along the lines of cell-cultured proteins.
The petition also relates to plant-based meat alternatives.
There's two approaches here. We either fear the future or we embrace it. And they're the choices. What the livestock industry does is their choice.
In April, France banned the use of meat and dairy-related words from vegan and vegetarian food labels. They'll be reserved for products of animal origin only. So, labelling like vegetarian sausage, vegan bacon and even almond milk are now forbidden.
It'd be really super if the meat industry let us use the words sausage and schnitzel and burger patty, and to steal those words would be really great because the customer knows what to do with those products.
And if you couldn't call them meat, what would you call them?
My sausage, well, maybe I'd call it a delicious stick of protein.
180, 1, 2, 3, 183, 4, 5, 6.
A call to arms is now starting to echo around Australian cattle yards.
Well, I think that might be a contentious issue. Our beef, our lamb, our chicken, our pork, and all the other meat products, they should be called meat, and anything else, they can come up with another name for their product.
Look, there's a niche market there, I suppose, but no, but they shouldn't be called meat at all.
Could be a threat, but at this stage, nothing better than a good bit of steak on the plate.
It's a conversation Australia's meat industry should have, according to National Farmers Federation President and Liverpool Plains beef producer FIONA SIMSON.
At this point in time, it's not meat as we traditionally know it. That may well change in the future depending on where technology goes.
FIONA SIMSON stopped short of ordering a US cattle industry-styled approach to protecting the word meat. But she says it is food for thought.
There's no reason to beat around the bush. If we're growing lab-based synthetic protein, let's call it lab-based protein. The NFF doesn't have a position yet, but clearly with the development of this sort of technology, and we see it advancing much quicker than I think anyone would have ever thought that it might have been. And there are some demands for that from the community.
But is it a risk to traditional livestock farming?
It's about eating protein, and potentially it is. I guess we have to see where it goes. At the moment, it'll depend what the consumer wants. Clearly there are some drivers, and we can't, stop technology.
Technological advancements have always reshaped agriculture and farming generally. But artificial meat, cell-cultured proteins, or whatever you want to call it, is coming fast. And it poses a fundamental challenge to the farming of animals for meat.
If we're going to feed the world, as we often are told we need to as livestock producers, we're going to need cultured meat as well as livestock production.
So if you can offer the same satisfaction in eating a meat product, at least the same amount of nutritional benefit, and feel good about it because it's doing good for the world and better for your body, why wouldn't people choose that option?